Okay, good evening. The special meeting of the Waco Independent School Board is hereby called to order. All items which may be discussed or voted upon this evening have been posted as required by state law. Really want to extend a warm welcome to everyone who's here. I'm so thankful that you guys have made the trek, and to our television viewers. The board's purpose is to set goals, listen to reports of the superintendent, approve budgets, contracts, personnel appointments, and make policy for the district. We are not here to make management decisions or solve problems of individuals. Management is the responsibility of the superintendent and her staff. And I would just ask right now, if you could please just turn your cell phones to silent, as I will do as well, if you have not already done so. And really do appreciate the time that you've taken to be here with us in Waco ISD. Okay, Renee, do we have any public comments? Okay, moving on to item number 2, consent agenda. Consider and take appropriate action. I will entertain a motion to accept the consent agenda as presented. Thank you, Mr. Grant. Thank you, Mr. Davis. Are there any questions, Mr. Grant? No. Any questions, Mr. Davis?
No.
Any questions, Mr. Vidania?
No.
Any questions, Mr. Ochoa?
No.
Any questions, Mr. Patton?
No.
Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Moving on to item number 3, review and discuss long-range facilities plan. Jared Stersinger, so glad that you're here. Oh, and Ms. Padetta.
Good evening, Madam President, Dr. Spicer, trustees. Well, Jared is here and he's going to make the presentation on the 2021 long-range plan that was developed prior to my arrival here and prior to many of your arrivals as well, and will give us some good history on how the district arrived at the plan for the 2021 bond.
Great. Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for allowing me to be here and give a little history lesson here on the facility condition assessment. And so as we get going, really trying to summarize what took months and months and many meetings here along the way, but ultimately was this vision that we set with the district, with the community in moving forward to cast a vision for that 15-year time frame, 10, 15-year time frame, but also what is the right first step here as we move forward. Ultimately, as Ms. Barrera indicated, this really started in January of 21. Had a really deep engagement, over 16 plus meetings, meeting with district administration, leadership within the district, but most importantly, the community. And really hearing from 90 plus people. If you might think back in that time, I know it was only like 4 or 5 years ago, we were all virtual at that moment. We actually had every single meeting online, and it was one of the best participations that we had with the entire community. Lots of feedback, able to get into breakout rooms. We had consistent participation, and really everybody locked in on helping support that vision and moving forward, really just driven by what is best for Waco and Waco ISD and supporting the long-range plan. Through that process, we were able to cover multiple aspects within the district, from the facility condition assessment, the educational suitability, thinking about how we're addressing different campuses and kind of interpreting the data as we went forward. Demographics, we looked at them then. We're going to look at them again tonight here as we move forward. And ultimately, again, how does all this come together to be able to support a vision? How do we address facilities? And how do we support, ongoing operations and maintenance within the district? From that process, we really identified three guiding principles that really took us forward in moving the needle with regard to facilities and support. The first of which is really that we need facilities that support the district vision for academic excellence. That's not only in today, but how are we supporting the facilities, the flexibility for the future? That brings us into thinking about CCMR. How do we prepare our students for a future that's unknown to us? But how do we have facilities that are supporting that? We wanted to make sure that there was equity across the primary and secondary campuses for those programs. Waco had gone through a bond program in the early 2010s. There were some newer facilities, there were some older facilities, but no matter where we want those facilities to support our students in the same way. That same vision that we have, we want to be able to bring them up, meet that same level of expectation. And ultimately, then, with that, the third goal was to maintain and protect the community's investment. You've done a great job of taking care of a lot of the facilities. We had looked at that. How do we continue to support that? So, how do we keep what's of value and move it forward? What it needs to be replaced, but how do we really help move the needle over that time frame? Overall, as we looked through that short and that long-term time frame, we really kind of came up with two priorities, or two groupings of priorities. The immediate priorities, which ultimately did become the 2021 bond program, but also we set a vision for the future of looking towards long-term priorities about, how do we support the students in student choice at the high school level, thinking about long-term vision at the elementary and the middle school campuses. But we also knew that there were some district-wide goals from a curriculum and instruction side, but also that there's still going to be ongoing facility condition assessment needs. How do we address ongoing operations and maintenance? Definitely a topic that hits these days with budgetary challenges that we're seeing, but really thinking about that future and moving forward. So as we look at those immediate priorities, it was kind of fun to look back here over the history and what we had thought about of, yes, let's look at a replacement Waco High School campus. All of this was coming amongst the time frame of when we were doing the land swap between the city, the ISD, and the county, ultimately creating that space that really, in this case, fronts new road, single facility. And amazingly, you get to see it coming to life here these days. A little bit more, I'll say, of a design and movement challenge was at the middle school level. Here, this is one where we started weighing in demographics and understanding the capacity and operational needs of the district. So here, we looked at consolidating Carver and Indian Spring and providing a new facility for them, and then as well a new facility for Tennyson Middle School. Again, as you rewind back, we were kind of going through this process really through the spring, and it was right at that moment when we were getting ready to call the bond that there was the unfortunate tragedy at Carver that kind of pivoted our plans. And, we were already thinking about this and able to just jump right into helping support that. And, greatly now Carver's open and excited to see that here along the way. Lastly, was then at the elementary school level. And at the elementary school, there was that, kind of variation need. So we had looked at all the individual campuses. So kind of at the left, we had identified campuses that had some minor to moderate needs, but then also some campuses that had moderate to more significant needs. And ultimately, this was one where we knew we had to really take a long-term picture of, okay, it's not something that we can address immediately within this one. We need to start moving it little by little along the way. So here there was an immediate priority then to address Kendrick, South Waco, and Alta Vista. But we knew that as the master plan continued to develop after we accomplished that first phase, we'd have to come back to this and really start again setting the vision for moving forward. As we go through, ultimately, all this information came together in that facility master plan. It was about a 20-page document that kind of summarized not only the goals, but our community and participation rate, the support that they had for addressing these facilities, their support for a potential call for a bond program that ultimately did result in the bond program, and really kind of setting the stage not only for the development that we've seen over the last several years, but a potential future and moving forward as well. Of course, one asks, well, what did we see from that? And this was always a very impactful graph for us as we were looking at it. So graph on the bottom indicates facility condition assessment, and on the y-axis shows the educational suitability. And so we were able to contrast those. And so your best performing schools from a bricks and mortar, from an educational suitability, are at the top right of the graph. And the ones with the most challenges or needing the most love are at the bottom left. And you'll see that there are 5 campuses, or actually 6 campuses circled within there. You know what's active and ongoing within construction. And the great thing is here after this, those campuses are going to move to the top right. They're going to be the best performing schools here within the district and meeting the needs for our students, our teachers, but then also operationally inside, and already seeing the results of those in practice day in, day out. So as we think about that facility master plan, that was really the moment in time that we really took into consideration a holistic view of the district, from facilities, from operations, and ultimately looking towards that goal. And ultimately now we're achieving that success within the district. So of course, that is a very short report on what took lots more detail within that. Happy to answer any questions that you have, but that was the genesis that then launched us into the bond program.
Great. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a quick question. It's not really related, but it's a facilities question. Are we still addressing some of the construction issues that we might need to look at Tennyson? I was talking with some teachers, and like if there's a light switch that doesn't work, are we still? Okay.
We've reached what we call substantial completion within the project, but there's also then what we call a punch list. So we're continuing to work through those. We're still getting warranty requests. Basically, you have a bumper-to-bumper warranty for a year. So those will all be worked through in the process.
I had a question about lake air on the graph. I noticed that it was in the, yeah, we can use this one. But I noticed, having visited Lake Air quite a bit, I was kind of surprised it wasn't on like the bottom quadrant. Can you kind of run down just brief framework of how you had reached that kind of conclusion? I know there was several kind of items in that rubric that kind of helped with that.
For each one of the campuses, the facility condition assessment identified a facility replacement cost and ultimately gave it a score. And so that is really what was defining the horizontal axis and how far left or how far right that identified. And so that was basically what needs to be replaced, what is at the end of the life. So the more of those things that there are, the lower the score that I got, so the further left to it would be.
Gotcha.
On the other side, on the educational suitability, same thing, but instead of looking at the bricks and mortar, we were thinking about, well, what is the instructional space? Do they have the appropriate whiteboards or technology? What is pickup like? Do you have an adequate queuing length within there? Is there a safe route for our students? And so it was really looking at how the building and the facility and the site support education. And so that was the case in each one of these. All of this is, again, a snapshot in time in 2020 or thereabouts. And so we would want to come back and, make sure that this still aligns with the future need as we're going forward.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Okay. Great. None. Thank you so much, Jared. I appreciate you coming and helping us with that. Okay, moving on to item number 4, review, discuss fall demographic update. Mr. Templeton, so glad that you can join us again. I always appreciate when you come and share with us.
Thank you, Board President, members of the board, Dr. Spicer. It is my pleasure to be with you this evening. And this is our fall demographic report. I'll start by touching on the economic conditions. We like to look at the unemployment rate. It kind of gives us a barometer of how the economy is doing. You can see that unemployment rate is staying near that 4% range, which basically means we're seeing full employment, a little bit of an uptick in the unemployment rate over the last couple of months. It tends to drift up a little bit at the end of summer, and then it'll go back down when we get to the shopping season with the holidays approaching. We definitely still have some headwinds, though. The headwinds of high inflation, the headwinds of higher housing costs. Housing costs are still a challenge. The interest rates likely going to start to come down a little bit. We did see a Fed reduction of about 50 basis points. That was a couple of weeks ago. Our chief economist with Zonda believes we could see another drop in the interest rates in 2025, which then could get that down in that 5% range, which would be very helpful for especially young buyers that are looking to get into housing. So could see an improvement in the overall housing market in 2025. When we continue to look at the housing data, this is total home sales by month within the Waco ISD. And so you can see the kind of turquoise, aqua-colored bar represents the monthly sales in 2024, and you can see that headwind effect there. So 2024 was much lower in August than we've seen in the last 4 years. Again, just about every month in 2024 had been less home sales than what we'd seen in either 22 or 21. Now, we haven't seen much of a softening in price, so prices are still staying up. That's because the demand is still pretty good, but we're also seeing a little bit of an anomaly in that people are staying in their homes because they likely took advantage of those low interest rates in 2020, 2021. So therefore, they're on the sidelines. Some of these might be looking to buy either a different home or a different area, but because of these interest rates being so different, they're staying put. So we need the interest rates to kind of come down, not only to stimulate reselling of homes as well. Listings have gone up just a little bit. Month supply of inventory also up just a little bit. Definitely could see a housing change in terms of being a little more optimistic in housing in the spring of 2025. Now, when we look at the multifamily picture, again, the multifamily picture, a little bit headwinds. It's a little different here because we've seen a significant amount of multifamily construction. That's that unit change. That's about 1,000 multifamily units were added as of September of 2024. That's an annualized rate. But you'll notice the occupancy rates are down below 86%. That's the lowest occupancy rates we've seen definitely in the last 3 to 5 years. These could be the lowest rates we've seen in almost 10 years. And this is happening in every market in Texas, so it's not something specific to Waco. This graph almost looks identical in Austin, in San Antonio, Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston. So it is a little better time to be a renter because you've got a few more options, but definitely a little bit of a cloudiness in the multifamily market as well. When we kind of zoom into the Waco School District, these are the elementary attendance zones. We're tracking about 8 future projects, and these are infill type projects, smaller. Those yellow shaded areas are where we have seen some development activity. It represents about 1,000 lots that are in the planning stages, kind of scattered throughout the core of Waco. Of course, the Floyd Casey Village, it's started its activity. I'll start with the lakes at University Parks. It's about 160 total lots, 6 homes under construction. Stylecraft is the builder, building about 20 to 30 homes per year, a low yield, so we don't see a lot of students in that area, but definitely seeing some housing construction. That price point is at $275 up to $360. Now, here's the Floyd Casey Village. It's about 240 future lots. It does have some multifamily units that are under construction. There is groundwork underway. The estimated date for the leasing for multifamily units could start any time now. A couple of those infill spots for some single-family development. One of those is the yellow shaded area that's in the Brook Avenue Elementary Zone. That's about 18 future lots. Currently includes about 16 lots, but the housing type and the final lot counts are still to be determined. The Renaissance at Sanger Heights is in the West Avenue Elementary Zone, 25 future lots. The preliminary plat was approved in September of 23. The initial ground clearing started in May. Now we're looking at some future developments that are in the Hines Elementary Zone. The Cameron Park Pocket neighborhood could represent about 152 future lots. The final plat was approved in August of 23. We haven't seen any groundwork start on that project yet. And then across the river, we've got the MLK Pocket neighborhood, which is about 241 future lots. The draft was started in December of 22, but we also haven't seen any groundwork start on the MLK Pocket neighborhood. On the multifamily side, we're tracking about 480 multifamily units that are under construction. Those are the purple shaded areas. You can see the 2 sliver purple projects that are in South Waco and one's in Bells Hill. And we've got an additional 1,600 multifamily units that are in various stages of planning. Those are that kind of aqua colored shaded areas are where we're seeing some multifamily future planned projects. The Viking Hills It's a redevelopment. It's about 82 apartment units. 69 of those are low-income units, 13 market rate units that approved a 9% tax credit back in 2022. Estimate the leasing on these could start mid-year in 2025. Now, Creekside Community Village, it is a very unique project. It is a part of the Mission Waco efforts. Definitely several groups are involved to help build these cottages. Very, very low students. I don't know that we'll have any students in this. But it's a unique project. I think it'll be a real benefit to the Waco community. It's about 346 future units, but it's a concept that is similar to one. I think there's already one in the city of Austin. So that's just a high-level look at what's happening in housing with single-family, multifamily. Here's a look at the enrollment projections. I will start by saying we work with about 80 school districts across Texas. Most of them are suburban communities, but we do work with several urban school districts, and we're definitely seeing a change in the enrollment patterns across the country and in Texas. Part of it is related to changes in birth rates. So the birth rates are well documented that they've been declining for a while. So that's leading to part of this overall decline in public ed enrollment across the country. In the last 4 years, public enrollment has declined by 2 million students. A lot of that is leaving public ed and going to either charters or privates or homeschool. The homeschool enrollment numbers have tripled in the last 3 years. So there's definitely, this enrollment decline is not something that is just happening in Waco. I think that's the takeaway that I want to leave with you. So you'll notice the kindergarten number. I always look at the kindergarten number first because that does give you a cue as to how that grade level is going to go over time. You can see that this year's kindergarten number is at 994. It could be a little bit higher than that now. That number does tend to change a little bit through the school year. But you'll notice it's the smallest it's been in the last 5 years. The yellow shaded cell is the largest grade per year. The green shaded cell is the second largest grade per year. So you can kind of see there's a little bit of a wave. This year's fourth grade class has been the second largest class going back to 2021. And so there's a little bubble there that's in the upper elementary grades, about to hit the middle school grades. You'll also notice that we regularly see a drop in enrollment from 5th to 6th. Pretty significant drops there. So we do take that into consideration when we're building the enrollment projections. At the grade level over the next 10 years, the enrollment could slip down to about 12,214. I would encourage you to focus on the 5-year number. Don't get too hung up on the 10. A lot of things can change, but in 5 years, your enrollment could be at about 12,564. Now, here's what these projections look like at the campus level, starting with the elementary campuses. You can see I've highlighted Alta Vista and kind of a color-coded that as a light gray. I've highlighted Alta Vista, Kendrick, the expanded South Waco. So with the combination of those 3 zones, that could easily fit or will fit into the 1,500 capacity that's now available through the expanded Kendrick and the expanded South Waco. And when we go out 5 years, that number would be at about 1,300 kids. So over time, that number is going to soften down to about 1,300. You'll notice Bells Hill, it's at about 751 students for next fall. Lake Air Montessori is at about 730. So those are your 2 largest enrollments. And then you can see several of them are in that 400 to 500 range. Over 5 years, your total elementary enrollment could be at about 6,631. At the secondary level, you can see that the middle school total is about 2,471. Of course, Tennyson is the largest enrolled middle school at 959. It does have the potential to move up to about 1,000 students before it starts to see that decline that would happen from those smaller classes working their way up into the middle schools over time. University High, Waco High, they're going to stay in that 16 to 1700 range for about the next 4 to 5 years. I'll do key takeaways and be ready to answer some questions. The region is continuing to see job growth. We are seeing a very low unemployment rate, but the rising interest rates that we saw over the last couple of years have caused a headwinds for the housing market. We've got 8 future subdivisions that we're tracking, which represent about 1,000 future lots. We do think the district's enrollment could be trending down to about 12,500 students. Be happy to answer any questions. You know, it's typically in that 1 to 2% range. And so over time, you know, we do this every year so that we can kind of move the needle as we see conditions change. And so typically within the 1 to 2 years, we're in about a 1 to 2% range. And then down, the further you go away from the base year, it can be 3 to 4%. We take all of this data and we put it into a GIS mapping software. So we have your students geocoded, we put the housing data in, we look at the mobility rates. And so our methodology for building the enrollment projection starts at the elementary campuses first. So we look at each elementary zone, we look at that mobility, we look at any data for housing, and then we build it elementary by elementary, and then we matriculate them up, advance them to the middle schools, do the same thing at the middle school level, and then the high schools are done last. The high schools tend to be our most accurate because we have so much leading data working up into the high schools versus the elementary. We're vulnerable at the elementary level by pre-K and kindergarten because we don't have leading information to guide those pre-K and kindergarten numbers.
Go ahead, yeah, please.
The development that's being built in the old Floyd Case, lots of units, where do you anticipate those people coming from? Are they coming from other Waco ISD properties that will then be vacant, or do you anticipate all these projects bringing in people while we're also losing?
That's a great question, and I would say when we really understand the pricing, the details of the type, then definitely that would have an impact on, are we seeing folks coming from outside the area or are we coming from within? I can tell you, I attend the Crestview Church of Christ here in Waco, and I'm still learning and meeting people, but I'm amazed. I continue to meet people that are moving into the church from outside the region, and they're coming from outside the state. Waco is definitely in that sweet spot logistically or geographically to where a lot of, and I wished I had moved here 15 years ago because of the proximity to where I need to get to. And so I think, to your question, I think there'll be some that'll come from outside the region, there'll be some that'll come from within. Then that does lead to the backfilling of the homes that are left.
Okay, there seems to be no questions. If you want to move on to, oh, yeah, go ahead.
It just popped in my head. Can you give me a rough number of how many new apartments units we are looking at within our boundary district?
So yes, you can see those turquoise shaded areas that are, those are the future, that are in what I would call them the planning stages. Those purple were the multifamily that are under construction, and another 1,600 that are in the planning stages. I suspect that is probably about a 4 to 5 year supply, so it's not going to come all at once. It'll likely come over time. Many of those would be what I would classify as, I believe they will end up being a lifestyle multifamily that tends to not have a high yield of students. From our experience, the number one factor on the yield is the tax credit or affordability. So you did have one that was a tax credited, but I want to say it was about 70, 80 units. Yes. And so that could have, 30 to 40 students that could be in that apartment unit. But I would suspect that 1,600 units would be built over a time period of about 3 to 4 years.
Thank you.
Okay.
As I mentioned, we put all this into a GIS system. I don't know if we're ready now to get to
Yeah.
the attendance zone parameters. We work with probably 20 school districts each fall where we're helping them with attendance zone planning. We put all of our student data, all of your student data into our software. We geocode them to their homes and apartments, and then that gives us this tool that we can draw new boundaries very quickly, and we can immediately see the impact on the enrollments, and we can look at that data and provide those boundary scenarios. Usually the first step in that is a discussion around parameters, guidelines, just kind of a review of items that would help guide a committee on the designing or the drawing of attendance zones. And I've got some examples of these. Attendance zone considerations are really going to be built around the new Kendrick South Waco School as it relates to Alta Vista. New Tennyson Middle School with that expanded capacity does provide the opportunity to look at the attendance zones and the feeder patterns. Changes to the elementary middle school zones, they allow for the opportunity to even review the high school zones. And so establishing parameters for assisting with these changes to the zones is a good first step. I've got some examples. These are some examples from districts that we've worked with over the last several years. And you'll notice that that you want to take a long view at looking at the zones so that you're not having to go back and readjust zones. Adjusting attendance zones are very emotional. And so taking a look at about a 5-year period then allows for those elementary kids to get through school before you would have to change them again. So that's the reason I like to take a 5-year look at the attendance zones. Attendance zones should largely be contiguous to the greater degree possible so that it avoids the appearance of gerrymandering. Walk paths to schools should be considered, allowing for smaller school populations in schools that have a higher anticipated growth rate. It's not a big issue for your district, but we do want to take a look at those areas like the Floyd Casey Stadium Village. We'll want to take a look at that. High schools should be aligned with middle schools. And when possible, elementary school boundaries should be aligned with middle school boundaries. That's the feeder pattern discussion, keeping neighborhoods together. That will keep them together as much as possible. The district should honor existing transfer patterns into schools. Transportation routes should be as efficient as possible, giving consideration to minimizing the ride times. There may be an option, well, that really doesn't, that last bullet doesn't apply for this setting. This is an example from a district in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Again, it's around optimizing space. I will say I'm seeing the optimization of space is becoming a greater parameter due to funding limitations. I have many districts that establish what is the optimal enrollment. So it's really about the number of sections per grade so that you can get a efficient use of the building. So I'm finding this parameter or guideline is becoming of higher importance because of what's happening with school funding. Neighborhood unity, natural boundary lines, contiguous boundaries, socioeconomic factors, consideration. So consideration given to those factors. Sometimes that can come into conflict with a boundary parameter that's proximity. So we want to be thoughtful about that making sure it's clear these are guidelines, they're not rules, because location and utilization, optimization, sometimes those can come into conflict with each other. Family impact really just means not changing those boundaries too frequently so that it avoids having families move multiple times. And then again, the feeder pattern alignment is a strong consideration that I see quite a bit. Frequently asked questions. I usually get this at the beginning of an attendance zone project. Why are we doing this? Many times it's because of either an opening and in some cases a closing of the school. In this case, because we've got some rebuilt buildings, some new buildings, that provided the opportunity to look at this. Current student transfers, that's going to be a big question right up the bat. I have found that as many of these that we can answer at the beginning of a process will alleviate a lot of questions. How is the schools going to be staffed? There's this assumption that it can really be heavy on the staff's minds about how these decisions are going to be made. Will transportation be provided if I'm a current student transfer? Typically, that's not. Typically transfers are not provided transportation. What about siblings and transfers? How will the changes impact the bus routes? Will the changes impact bell times? Will programs be impacted by the attendance zone changes? And then what is the timeline for establishing the new attendance zones? So just wanted to start out by giving you that view of the parameters that I see quite often, guidelines, and then just some of the frequently asked questions that I see.
May I ask a question?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
When was the last time that the board has done this, that the district has done this?
Would be Crestview, Provident Heights.
When was,
Yep, probably around then when we did the bond.
12 years ago?
Wow, that's good. Yeah.
And listen, we got to get it right this time because I don't want to do it again for the next 10 years, okay?
We've seen a lot of advancements in technology and software to help with this now, so it is a much faster process. Back when I started doing this in '97, we really couldn't do it live. Now, when I work with the committee, I'll be able to do those boundary plans right there, and they can immediately see the impacts of those decision changes.
A couple of things that we want you guys to consider is what guidelines you want to give the committee. So we do start our committee meetings next week. And we're bringing in people that you all recommended and people that our principals recommended. So administrators will be there, parents and community members will be there. Another thing that we're also doing, we have a thought exchange that will launch next week as well. That will go out to the entire community. So we'll have all that feedback, even though people aren't in that space, right? So based off some of the examples that they gave, we just need to know what are the outcomes, the parameters that you're seeking from us so that we can inform that committee. So that's kind of what this conversation is about today, all right?
I got a question about the attendance zone consideration you have. The socioeconomic factors, I can see that as a really, it can be used for good or for bad, I think, right? Like this side of the tracks, that side of the tracks. Is the hope here to bring about heterogeneity of a mixture of lots of different types of socioeconomic or separation?
Most of the time, I see it in terms of economically disadvantaged numbers. So it's about Title I, the federal title allocation. So then understanding how the attendance zones affect those kinds of funding implications is where I see it used most, is about just understanding that if you overload a school that has, a high population of economically disadvantaged students, then that school may need to be staffed differently, or there may need to be a different approach to how it is supported.
Yes.
Maybe a Gloria question. How close are we to capacity at Tennyson?
It was right there, wasn't it?
How close are we to capacity at the new Tennyson?
We're at 9:59 and it's 10:60. What is capacity at Lake Air? Is that back at elementary?
It's right there, 920.
And we're at 735 there?
My experience with capacity at elementary levels, there really needs to be a buffer. Because what can happen at the elementary levels is the grade levels don't come in equal numbers. So you'll have a grade level that gets to, I'm just using it as an example, if it's 115 kids in a grade level, that now needs 6 sections. So therefore, your utilization drops, but yet you need another classroom. And so there needs to be a little bit of a wiggle room for capacity at elementaries. Middle schools and high schools, there is a little more flex space because it's not about sections per grade level at middle school. It's about the programming, the schedule. There's so many factors that go into utilization at middle schools and high school where there's actually some flexibility there because it's also based on how the buildings are used.
Except that Lake Air is a combination elementary and middle school.
Got those middle school grades, yes.
But we have at least 2 campuses that are, well, that are really low. Crestview and West Avenue, the capacity versus the attendance is almost 50%.
Are we considering, I guess, neighborhood rivalries in this too? I know last time we had a changing of middle schools, we went through a lot of issues because we didn't look into that. So are you guys factoring in, I guess, the violence that we're seeing in our community and that some of our kids might be involved in too as we're rezoning, particularly the middle and high schools? Is what I'm wondering. Are we
The
considering
bad kind of rivalry, not the rah-rah rivalry.
that? Exactly.
I think that could be something that you could direct as a consideration.
So one of the things that I kind of made note of is just some things we can consider. So that could be one of the parameters that we need to kind of put in our list, right? Somebody write that down for me. If you look at this attendance zone considerations, a couple of things that I did make note of that I want you to consider that I think you should, just to kind of get us going in that right direction. The top one says optimize space. So that's something I think we could put as a parameter because we do need to look at all of our spacing and seeing, what kids are there, what kids are not, which ones are at capacity, which ones are not, right? Going further down on the right side, feeder pattern alignment. That's something we can look at as well. So from elementary to middle school to our high schools, right? Another thing is just balancing, looking at our programming and the funding that goes with that, right? A couple things I added based off some things I've heard from you all and just some of my visits is future needs to support elementary campuses. I've heard that we need to just look past our current elementary needs, but also future ones. So that's another parameter that could be added to that that's not listed there. And then natural boundaries and then neighborhood unity. They had to talk about that, but just what's clean, right? So that we can help our families, support our families, but also kind of just make sure they see like a pathway, if you will. So those are some things that I have like kind of noted based off what I've heard from just you all, but also just different community in our staff. So
One of the advantages of optimizing space, besides the funding issue, is scores. Smaller schools, students count more for state scoring, whereas when you have a larger campus, each student really percent-wise counts less. And I know that a lot of districts have gone to really large schools that, for one of the reasons being state assessment scores, but I also would like to encourage the board and this committee to be aware of some of these traditionally small schools that have a climate that is very important to that neighborhood and to that school. So, looking at our magnet schools, for example, we, people choose to go there. And I think looking at optimizing space, we can't not make a blanket statement that all small schools are bad, even though big schools will give us a payoff on state scores, there's got to be a balance between the school cultures of those small schools as well.
I agree with you, Mr. Patton. I think that there is a balance that we have to strike in terms of efficiency and effectiveness, and I do think there is something to, I personally like small schools. It allows teachers to get to know their students a little bit better, but there is a efficiency with a larger school in terms of financial cost, and I think that's something that we're going to have to kind of put in a scale, so to speak, and kind of figure that out. But I think for me personally, I do think optimization of space, I think that that is, in this climate, in this financial climate, I think that is, would be very prudent of this board to consider. And I put on there balancing. I want to see program equity kind of throughout our schools. I don't want to see students taken from one campus and then that campus is no longer able to fund art or music or some of these programming. So to me, that feels very important. And also, I think those natural lines, kind of those feeder pattern alignment, making sure those kind of students stay kind of together really speaks, and for lack of a better term, but just the family impact. You know, we want to make as little disruption, I think, to our students and to our families. We don't want to just kind of throw pieces around and just let them fall where they may. But I really do want to take into consideration our families and our students when we are going through and conducting these or looking through these lines. And I'm so glad to hear that your technology allows you to kind of move things and so people can see kind of the immediate impact of that. I think that'll be very interesting and a great thought process to kind of engage in.
With that ability, Stephanie, will we be able to look at transportation simultaneously?
Great question.
I can't look at transportation with my software, but there are software, I'm sure your transportation department uses
They told us that that's what they did
Yeah.
when we were doing.
So they will,
Usually
so
what they do is they'll go through
Edison
and
will be
they can
part of
route.
this, or someone from his department will be attending this ridiculous, because
I
we'll
don't
need
know
that
that,
in.
but I can find out. But what we also can do after those committee meetings, we will be able to have conversations with them and/or before, in between, because we have several planned.
Coming to the microphone so that
Yes.
it all gets recorded. Yes, transportation is going to be a part of the committee meetings. What I wanted to caution is I don't want to promise that our software for TransFinder works as efficiently in the moment as Bob's software works. It is very much a consideration of every way that Bob will lay out an example map where we'll end a meeting. We'll take a look at what we built in some time if you look at that schedule that was communicated, so we can then analyze through our other software. What Bob does is pretty kind of scary, all this geo-tracking and the ways that he can do it. TransFinder doesn't work quite the same, but we'll definitely be balancing back and forth, and transportation will be very much a part of the conversation, and hazardous routes and all those things.
It's great.
I've got a couple questions. As far as the intimate, smaller school settings, my kids benefited from Hillcrest PDS, and I will say it was very helpful in their process. I do also remember that there were many families that did not get into the magnet school. And so for me, that intimacy was at the cost of somebody else not getting that opportunity. And so I think when we think about the quaintness or the small feel of it, there's an equity issue there that I want us to make sure that all of our kids, we've talked about that, reading levels at certain schools are different than other feeder patterns, and I think that's a part of it. And so there's got to be a way for us to think about how do we keep that smaller classroom or whatever it is feel while making the equity piece central in our magnet schools. Because that's not really affected by attendance zones, but the transportation of that will be. I had a question for Jeremy, we've talked a lot about the how violence and those kinds of things are played out by. Is that based on fixed housing, or is there more mobility in those populations that an attendance zone would be hard to, without keeping moving to monitor or to control?
Yeah, I think this is when we call in our gang task force in the city of Waco. I think they'll be able to answer better than I can. But what I will say is there are fixed sections that we don't want to force into a marriage that they don't want to be a part of. So I would call on the experts. That's why they're there. We have the McLennan County Gang Collaborative that I'm pretty sure will be more than happy to be a part of the committee, who would have this data, who would know where these things are occurring and how to separate entities that need to be separated. So I do think it's very important, especially at that middle school and high school level. We've all been on the board and we've seen what happens if we don't pay attention to it. So I think it would be in our best interest to make sure that that's one of the factors we're considering.
Well, that's a challenge in collapsing schools into bringing Indian Spring and Carver together. That was maybe not an unintended consequence, but something that I didn't think about and resulted in some issues.
Yeah. Any other questions? Sure.
So the notes that I've made, are y'all good to call those parameters? And I can kind of read through those, and I'll make them pretty, but just kind of read through to make sure we're all on the same page and make sure nothing's left out. Let me see if I can follow my notes. Optimize space, and we'll wordsmith it just so it's clear. Natural boundaries and neighborhood unity. Smaller schools that are built around their neighborhoods, kind of have that as a consideration. I put rivalry, and that speaks to what you were talking about, but I know what that means. Look at efficiency and effectiveness. I also wrote down equity and processing for those who might not be able to get in, and that's the point that Mr. Grant just made. Feeder pattern alignment and balancing. So what I am gonna task us on our team to do is kind of take this and make a template listing those things out to make sure that we're on the same page. And then that way, as the community's working through the work, these are the things they have to keep in consideration. And one of the things that our team talked about was to the greatest extent possible, okay? So you can't guarantee anything, because you got to move some cheese. We have to. It's going to happen. But we want to make sure that we think about all of these parameters, outcomes, all the different things that have to go into play to make the right decision. So we'll work through that and just bring forth some recommendations for you guys to approve, of course, at the end of the project. But we'll kind of keep communicating with you guys as we go through the journey. Is this fair? Is that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Templeton, can I ask you a question? May I ask you a question? Okay, I know that you said optimizing space, and I think in my mind that it seems kind of like a no-brainer, but what are some other considerations maybe that you have seen really frequently made by other school districts?
Well, around that optimization of space, what I've seen some districts do is they like to have even numbers of sections at the elementary grade level. So they want to have a enrollment size where there are either 4 sections per grade or 6. They don't want that 5 because it makes it hard to team teach with those odd sections. So that's a little bit in the optimization space, because it's about hitting that number that gives you the chance to be in that 4 or 6. Now, 6 means it's going to be a little bigger. 4 is in that, probably 400 to 500 range. So 4 is about 80 something kids per grade level. At 6 grades, basically 6. So that's 350, 400 would be about what you could be at a 4 section per grade campus. But that's an example of how districts have thought about optimization. It's for at the elementary level, it's about sections per grade.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much for coming.
welcome.
I really appreciate that, and I
You're welcome.
always appreciate your projecting and kind of what you've, I feel like it's very thorough, and I feel like it's very well thought out, so thank you so much for that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Great.
everybody was 1% to 2% off, that would be fantastic.
Okay, announcements, Ms. Cox.
Good evening, President Cordwig, Dr. Spicer, Board. Next week, Thanksgiving meals continue. It's been great to see Mr. Vidania, and I think a few of the rest of you have made it out to our meals. CNS did condense them. We've had a conversation. They are condensed into 2 weeks. They are busy with a audit and some other things. So we're giving something a try, but there's something happening every evening and on almost every day on a campus. Hope you can get out and enjoy it. It was really fun last night. I was at Kendrick at UHS. It was great. This Friday, our Lions and Trojans are wrapping up district play. UHS is home. Waco High is in Bryan. I have a special sticky where Coach Love called and gave me the playoff predictions for UHS. I'm not going to jinx it, but we are hoping for a home game next Friday. So stay tuned for what happens this Friday. Tuesday evening, November 12th, so next week, our first Attendance Boundary Citizens Committee will convene here. A lot of that meeting will be similar content from Mr. Sterzinger and Mr. Templeton and the team. Just helping that group kind of get on the same page with everyone and what you all heard tonight. And then the following week, Thursday, November 21st, will be our regular board meeting. So,
Ms. Cox, how many how many members are on this committee that will be meeting on Tuesday?
sent over 60 invites.
Do we have RSVPs? We're expecting around 60?
I have not, I've only heard that 2 of those 60 said that they would not be able to commit to the entire process.
Wonderful.
The invitation did lay out that this is a months-long process, and so what I've seen, having done this before, is that stuff comes up in people's lives, but we are working with the communications team to hopefully make sure and put materials from every meeting, make them available to them, and try to bring everyone along. But each meeting will build on themselves, like from the previous one. So it really is important that people, once they are committed, they try to attend the full process. Yes, sir.
So it's going to be kind of like the master building, the committee, every week kind of meeting together, what we did with what Jared led.
So yes, I also was
You
part
were
of the
there,
team that
that's right.
unfortunately wasn't there, so I don't want to categorize it, but yes, very similar.
So every meeting kind of building on one another.
Correct.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I think this is the record of the shortest meeting we've had. We are now adjourned at 6:58.